She woke up in a bed that wasn't hers. The sheets were silk. The air unfamiliar. Her head pounding. For one terrifying second, Maya Carter didn't know where she was. Then she saw him. Ethan Pierce, her boss. The man who'd never once looked at her in 3 years at Pierce Industries, standing by the window, fully dressed, silent as stone. Last night was a blur. The office party. The champagne. His offer to drive her home. The city lights reflecting in his eyes. His voice when he said her name like it mattered. And then, nothing. She looked down. His shirt. Her skin. Her heartbeat in her throat. Something had happened, something she couldn't remember. He didn't turn around. Didn't say a word. The silence between them was unbearable, heavy enough to crush air. She gathered her things with shaking hands, desperate to leave, desperate to understand what she'd done. But when she reached the door, he finally spoke. Just 2 words. And they changed everything. Don't forget this. She froze. Because she couldn't even remember it. And 9 months later, she'd be holding his child. A secret he could never afford, and one she couldn't hide. Hello family. Welcome back to Mr. Harrington Stories. May your week be blessed with the courage to love without fear. To speak the words that sit heavy on your tongue. To reach for the person you think you don't deserve. Type present if you believe some confessions are worth the risk. If you've ever held a truth so big it felt like it might break you. If you've ever been loved by someone who didn't know how to say it out loud. And if you're ready for a story where secrets don't stay buried, where the past doesn't let go and the heart doesn't forget, hit that subscribe button. Because the truth always finds a way. It might take 9 months or 9 years. But it finds a way. Now, let's go back to the beginning. 3 years before that morning. Before the silk sheets and the silence. Before the secret that would change everything. Maya Carter was invisible. She worked in accounting. 3rd floor. A cubicle wedged between the copy room and the emergency exit. Fluorescent lights that hummed like a headache. A desk that wobbled when she typed. A view of gray concrete and other people's windows. 12-hour shifts. Sometimes 14. Her fingers flying across keyboards, chasing numbers that never added up to enough. Not enough for her mother's chemotherapy. Not enough to stop the collection calls every Tuesday. Not enough to breathe. She never complained. Never asked for help. Never let anyone see the cracks. Because that's what girls like her did. They survived. Maya had been at Pierce Industries for 3 years. In those 3 years, Ethan Pierce had looked at her exactly twice. Once in an elevator. She'd frozen, stammered an apology, pressed herself against the wall like she could disappear into the metal. He'd glanced at her for half a second, then returned to his phone. 43 seconds. She counted every one. The second time in the parking garage. Past midnight. She was leaving after closing quarterly reports. He was arriving in a black town car, his tie loosened, his face carved from stone and shadows. Their eyes met. Then his driver opened the door and he was gone. That was everything. Her invisible. Him untouchable. Until the holiday party. Pierce Industries threw the kind of Christmas party that made people forget they spent the other 364 days exhausted. Open bar. Catered food. A live band playing jazz that made the marble lobby feel like an old movie. Maya almost didn't go. Her mother was dying. The doctor said weeks now, maybe days. Every moment away felt like betrayal. But her mother insisted. Baby, you need to live a little. Go to the party. Wear something pretty. Smile at a boy. For me. So Maya went. Simple black dress from a thrift store. No jewelry except her grandmother's cross necklace. Hair in twists that fell past her shoulders. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself. She looked pretty. Not invisible. The party was already alive when she arrived. Laughter echoing off marble. The bar glowing amber. Women in designer gowns gliding like swans. Men in tuxedos talking mergers and Alps vacations. Maya found her corner. Where she could watch without being watched. Then Marcus from IT found her. Kind Marcus, who remembered birthdays and asked about her mother even though he'd never met her. He made her laugh. Really laugh. The kind that came from somewhere deep, somewhere she'd forgotten existed. They talked about nothing. Bad coffee. Worse bosses. The way the city looked from the 37th floor when it snowed. And across the room, through the crowd, Ethan Pierce saw her. Really saw her. He was standing with board members, whiskey in hand that he hadn't touched, listening to golf stories he didn't care about. His face a perfect mask. Then he heard her laugh. It cut through the noise like light through fog. Bright. Genuine. Unguarded. He turned. There she was. The girl from accounting whose name he should have known but didn't. Black dress that wasn't expensive but fit like it was made for her alone. Her head thrown back. Her smile so wide it looked like it hurt in the best way. Something in his chest cracked. Like a door he'd welded shut was suddenly unlocked. Ethan Pierce was 34. He'd built an empire on discipline and distance. He didn't do feelings. Didn't do attachment. Didn't let people close because wounds could kill you if you let them. But watching her laugh, watching her be alive, made him remember something buried. He used to laugh like that once. Before the betrayals. Before he learned that vulnerability was just another word for weakness. He wanted it back. And maybe she could show him how. The night wore on. Champagne flowed. Music shifted to something slower. Couples swayed like the world outside didn't exist. Marcus left to catch the last train. Maya stood alone by the windows, looking out at snow-covered streets. That's when Ethan approached. She didn't hear him. Didn't sense him close enough to smell her perfume, something floral and inexpensive and devastatingly real. Then he spoke. "You're Maya Carter. Accounting." She turned. Froze. There he was. Ethan Pierce. The man who'd built an empire. The man who never smiled. The man whose eyes were fixed on her like she was the only person in the room. Her heart forgot how to beat. "Yes, sir. I didn't think you knew my name." He almost smiled. "I know everyone's name." A lie. But a kind one. They stood in silence. Party behind them. Snow falling outside. Between them, something neither could name but both could feel. "It's late," he said. "And it's snowing. Can I give you a ride home?" Maya should have said no. Should have taken the subway like always. Should have gone back to her small life with small dreams that never asked for too much. But she was tired. So tired. Of being invisible. Of being strong. Of carrying weight meant for more than one. So she said yes. And everything changed. The ride started quiet. His driver navigating white streets. The city looked different through tinted windows. Softer. Less cruel. Ethan sat beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his heat. He didn't look at his phone. Didn't check emails. Just sat. "Your mother," he said. "She's sick." Maya's breath caught. "How did you?" "I pay attention." She didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to respond to kindness from a man who wasn't supposed to be kind. So she told him the truth. The cancer. The bills. The hospice where her mother spent days staring out windows, waiting. How Maya worked 12-hour shifts and still couldn't afford her mother the dignity of dying somewhere beautiful. Ethan listened. Really listened. Not with pity. Not with discomfort. With presence. When she finished, her voice was shaking. Hands clenched in her lap. She felt raw. Exposed. "I'm sorry. You didn't ask for all that." "No. But I'm glad you told me." They pulled up to her building. A walk-up in a neighborhood gentrification hadn't reached. The kind of place where heat only worked half the time and stairs creaked like they might collapse. Maya reached for the door handle. "Wait." She turned. Found him looking at her with eyes that weren't cold anymore. Weren't distant. "Come with me. Just for a drink. Just to not be alone tonight." She should have said no. But she didn't want to be alone either. So she went. His penthouse was a different world. Glass and steel and views that made her dizzy. He poured wine. They sat on a couch that probably cost more than her car. And they talked. About nothing. About everything. His childhood. A father who taught him love was weakness. Building a company from nothing to prove he was worth something. Her dreams. Wanting to be a teacher once. How life had other plans and she'd learned to let go of things too big to hold. Hours passed like minutes. And somewhere between the second glass and the third, something shifted. His hand brushed hers. Not an accident. A question. She didn't pull away. An answer. Maya. Yes? I'm not drunk. She looked at him. Really looked. Saw his eyes clear. Focused. Steady. Neither am I. What happened next wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. His hands in her hair. Her fingers tracing scars on his chest she didn't ask about. His lips on her neck, her collarbone, the hollow of her throat. Her breath catching. His name a prayer in her mouth. Gentle. Desperate. Sacred. The first time either of them had let someone see them completely. When it was over, when they lay tangled in sheets that smelled like him, Maya felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. But morning came the way morning always does. And with it, doubt. Maya woke to sunlight too bright and a bed too soft. She reached for him. Found empty space. Across the room, by the windows, Ethan stood fully dressed. Back to her. Shoulders rigid. She waited for him to turn. To smile. To say something that would make the night before real. He didn't move. In that silence, Maya understood. Whatever this was, whatever they'd shared, he was already pulling away. She dressed quickly. Quietly. Hands shaking. Heart breaking in ways she had no words for. When she reached the door, she paused. Ethan? He didn't turn. She left. In the elevator, descending back to her world, Maya Carter made a promise. She would forget this night. Bury it so deep not even she could find it. Go back to being invisible. Because that's what girls like her did. They survived. 2 weeks later, everything fell apart. Maya missed her period. At first she told herself it was stress. The late nights. Her mother's decline. The weight of existing. Then she missed another. The pregnancy test sat on her bathroom counter for 3 days before she could take it. 2 pink lines. Positive. She stared until the lines blurred. Until she couldn't tell if she was breathing or drowning. Her mother was dying. Rent overdue. Job barely covered groceries. And now this. A child. His child. The child of a man who couldn't even look at her the morning after. Maya didn't call him. Didn't tell anyone. Just stopped showing up to work. Let her phone ring unanswered. Disappeared into her apartment like she could vanish if she stayed still enough. Her mother noticed. Baby, what's wrong? The hospice. Late afternoon light through thin curtains. Her mother's hand in hers, so thin Maya could feel every bone. Nothing, Mama. I'm just tired. Her mother looked at her with eyes that still saw everything, half blind with pain. You're carrying something heavy. I can see it. Maya's throat closed. She wanted to tell her. Wanted to collapse into her mother's arms like she was 5 and the world was still simple. But her mother was dying. And Maya couldn't add this weight. I'm fine. I promise. She wasn't fine. But she'd learned to lie to the people she loved. 3 weeks after Maya disappeared, Ethan's assistant found her. The knock came at 8 in the morning. Sharp. Insistent. Maya opened the door exhausted, her hand instinctively protecting her stomach even though it barely showed. And there he was. Ethan Pierce. In a $1,000 suit. Standing in her hallway that smelled like mildew and someone else's cooking. His eyes went to her face. Then lower. To her hand. To what she was protecting. She watched his world tilt. Can I come in? She should have said no. Should have closed the door and kept her secret buried. But she was tired of carrying it alone. So she stepped aside. He entered slowly. Taking in the peeling paint. The overdue bills. The photograph of her mother in a cracked frame she couldn't afford to replace. Maya. Is it mine? The question hung between them like smoke. She could have lied. Could have told him it was someone else's. Could have set him free. But she was tired of lying too. Does it matter? He looked at her then. Really looked. And she saw something unexpected in his face. Fear. Not anger. Not accusation. Fear. Yes. It matters. For the first time since that morning in his penthouse, Maya felt something shift. Maybe he wasn't the villain she'd made him. Maybe he was just as terrified as she was. But before either could speak, before truth could settle between them like something solid, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Expensive heels. Confident. Coming closer. The door Maya had left ajar swung open. And there, framed in the doorway like a predator who'd found prey, stood Victoria Monroe. Elegant. Poised. Eyes sharp enough to cut. She looked at Maya. Then at Ethan. Then back at Maya's hand, still resting on her barely there belly. And she smiled. The kind of smile that promised blood. "Well," she said softly, "isn't this interesting? If you were Maya, standing in a crumbling apartment with the father of your child and the woman who wants to destroy you, would you tell the truth and risk everything? Or would you protect yourself and walk away forever?" After Victoria left that day, after the door closed and the silence settled like dust, Maya expected Ethan to disappear. That's what men like him did, wasn't it? When things got complicated, when the fantasy cracked and reality bled through, they vanished back into their towers of glass and steel, leaving girls like her to clean up the mess alone. But Ethan didn't disappear. 3 days later, Maya woke to find groceries outside her door. Not just any groceries. The good kind. Organic produce. Fresh bread from the bakery 3 neighborhoods over that she'd mentioned once months ago. In passing conversation she didn't think anyone was listening to. Prenatal vitamins. Ginger tea for the nausea that had her bent over the toilet most mornings. No note. No explanation. Just provisions, like someone was trying to say something they didn't have words for. She told herself it was guilt. Rich man's charity. Nothing more. But then he showed up. It was late. Past 11. Maya was coming home from the hospice, exhausted, her feet aching, her heart heavier than it had been that morning. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, each step a small mountain, and there he was. Sitting on the floor outside her door. Suit jacket draped over his knees. Tie loosened. Head resting against the wall like he'd been there for hours. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. And the expression on his face, tired, uncertain, almost fragile, made something in her chest crack. "I brought soup," he said quietly. "You looked cold the other day." She should have told him to leave. Should have been angry that he thought groceries and soup could fix what was broken between them. But she was cold. And tired. And so unbearably lonely. So she let him in. They didn't talk much that first night. He heated the soup on her temperamental stove that only worked if you hit it just right. She sat at her small table, watching him move through her kitchen like he was trying to memorize it. The chipped counters. The leaking faucet. The refrigerator that hummed too loud. He didn't look uncomfortable. Didn't look like he was slumming. Just looked present. When he set the bowl in front of her, their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away. It became a pattern after that. He'd show up at odd hours. Sometimes with food. Sometimes with nothing but his presence. He never stayed long. Never pushed for conversation. Just existed in her space like he was learning a new language. The language of being human instead of powerful. Maya didn't know what to do with it. This version of Ethan Pierce that sat on her worn couch and asked about her day. That fixed the leak under her sink without being asked. That looked at her like she was something precious instead of something broken. One evening, she came home to find him at the hospice. She'd stopped by after work, what little work she could still manage between the exhaustion and the morning sickness. Her mother had been sleeping when she arrived, so Maya sat in the vinyl chair by the window, holding her mother's hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of ending. That's when she saw him. Through the small window in the door. Ethan Pierce, standing in the hallway, talking to one of the nurses. He was writing something. A check, she realized. A very large check. The nurse's eyes were wide. She was nodding, thanking him, promising better care, private rooms, whatever he needed. Maya's throat closed. Because he didn't know she was watching. Didn't know she could see him doing something kind when no one was looking. When he finally entered the room, he froze. Saw her there. Saw that she'd witnessed everything. For a moment, neither spoke. Then her mother stirred. Opened her eyes, cloudy now, fading like old photographs. Saw Ethan standing awkwardly by the door. "You must be him," her mother whispered. her voice thin as paper. "The one who made my baby smile again." Ethan looked at Maya. Something raw and unguarded in his expression. "I'm trying to," he said softly. Her mother smiled, reached out a trembling hand. "Come here, son." And Maya watched, heart in her throat, as Ethan Pierce, billionaire CEO man who'd built empires on control and distance, knelt beside a dying woman's bed and let her hold his hand. Her mother studied his face for a long moment, then squeezed his fingers with what little strength she had left. "You'll take care of her," she said. Not a question. A command. "Yes, ma'am." "And the baby?" "Yes." "Good." Her mother's eyes drifted closed. Because she deserves someone who shows up. When Maya walked him out later, after her mother had fallen back asleep, she finally found her voice. "You didn't have to do that. Pay for all this." Ethan stopped in the hallway. The fluorescent lights made him look tired. Human. "I know," he said. "But I wanted to." "Why?" He turned to face her fully. And the look in his eyes made her forget how to breathe. "Because men who don't care, Maya, don't show up at 2 a.m. with soup. They don't pay medical bills. They don't sit in waiting rooms hoping for a chance to make things right." She felt tears building. "I told myself you didn't care." "I know." His voice was rough. "I made you believe that. And I'm sorry." They stood there in the humming silence of the hospice corridor. Between them, something was shifting. Something fragile and terrifying and real. Maybe he wasn't the villain she'd built in her head. Maybe he was just a man who didn't know how to be soft, learning from a woman who'd forgotten she was allowed to need someone. But the world outside didn't care about maybes. While Ethan was learning to be human, Victoria Monroe was planning his destruction. She'd spent 5 years positioning herself as the future Mrs. Pierce. 5 years of charity galas and board meetings and carefully orchestrated photographs that made investors comfortable. 5 years building a narrative that Ethan Pierce was stable, predictable, safe. And Maya Carter threatened all of it. Victoria didn't just want Maya gone. She wanted her erased. Like she'd never existed. Like that night had never happened. Like the child growing inside her was nothing but an inconvenience that money could make disappear. So Victoria did what she did best. She weaponized the truth. The board meeting was called for a Friday morning. Emergency session. Attendance mandatory. Ethan arrived to find the conference room already full. Investors in expensive suits. Board members with carefully neutral expressions. And Victoria, sitting at the far end of the table, perfectly composed in cream silk and pearl earrings. She smiled at him. The kind of smile that promised blood. "Ethan," one of the board members began, his voice measured. "We've received some concerning information." "Concerning how?" "About your personal life. A relationship with an employee. A pregnancy." The board member paused. "We've been informed that this employee is refusing a paternity test and making demands." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Who told you that? Does it matter?" Another board member leaned forward. "This is a liability, Ethan. The IPO is in 3 months. Investors are already nervous. If this gets out, if there's a scandal, we could lose everything." "There's no scandal." "Then prove it." Victoria's voice was silk over steel. "Take the paternity test. Pay her off. Sign an NDA. Make it go away." The room waited. 18 pairs of eyes on him. 18 people who'd helped him build an empire, now asking him to choose. Profit or person. Control or chaos. The life he'd built or the woman who'd shown him how to live. Ethan stood slowly, his hands flat on the mahogany table. "No." The room went silent. Victoria's smile faltered. "She's not for sale," Ethan said, his voice cold as winter. "She's not a liability. She's not a problem to be solved. And I won't reduce her to line items and legal documents because you're afraid of bad press. Ethan, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. For the first time in my life." He looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. "If choosing her costs me this company, then maybe this company wasn't worth having." The silence that followed was deafening. Because for the first time in anyone's memory, Ethan Pierce had chosen a person over profit. Victoria's face went pale, then red, then perfectly blank. But her eyes promised war. The meeting ended in chaos. Whispered conversations. Worried glances. Victoria left without a word, her heels clicking like gunshots on marble floors. Ethan stayed behind, alone in the conference room, staring out at the city he'd conquered, wondering if he'd just thrown it all away. But when he thought of Maya, of her laugh, her strength, the way she'd looked at him in the hospice like maybe he was worth saving too, he knew he'd make the same choice every time. 2 days later, Maya's mother died. It happened in the early hours of morning, when the world was still dark and the hospice was quiet except for machines breathing for people who couldn't breathe on their own. Maya was there, holding her mother's hand, watching the numbers on the monitors drop like countdown to something inevitable. She'd known it was coming. The doctors had been clear. Days, they'd said. Maybe hours. But knowing doesn't make it hurt less. When the final breath came, soft, almost peaceful, Maya felt the world tilt. Like gravity had changed. Like she was falling even though she was sitting perfectly still. She didn't cry at first. Just sat there, holding her mother's hand as it grew cold, feeling the absence of pulse like missing a step in the dark. Then it hit her. The knowing. The weight of alone. And she broke. Sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Clutching her mother's hand like if she held tight enough, she could pull her back. Like love was a rope that could tether souls to earth. She didn't call anyone. Didn't reach for her phone. Just let the grief crash over her in waves that had no mercy. That's when the door opened. She didn't look up. Assumed it was a nurse coming to do what nurses do when patients become bodies. But then arms wrapped around her. Strong. Steady. Smelling of expensive cologne and something warmer. Ethan. He didn't ask if she was okay. Didn't offer platitudes about heaven or peace or being in a better place. He just held her. Let her tears soak his shirt. Let her fall completely apart in his arms without trying to fix her. His hand was in her hair. His heart beating steady against her ear. And for the first time since she'd woken up in his bed all those months ago, Maya felt safe enough to be weak. She didn't know how long they stayed like that. Time didn't exist in grief. Just the steady rhythm of his breathing. The warmth of his body. The silent promise that she didn't have to carry this alone. When she finally pulled back, her face swollen, her voice hoarse, she looked at him with something like wonder. "How did you know to come?" "I just knew." His thumb brushed her cheek. "I'll always know." And in that moment, in that hospice room that smelled like disinfectant and endings, Maya realized something terrifying. She was falling for him. Had been falling for a while now. Not because he had money or power or could pay medical bills, but because he showed up. In the hard moments. When there was nothing to gain and everything to lose. Because love doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for convenient timing or perfect circumstances. It just happens. The funeral was small. Just Maya and a few of her mother's friends from church. They laid her to rest under an oak tree in a cemetery that overlooked the city. Ethan stood beside Maya through all of it. Holding her hand. Being the strength she couldn't find in herself. When it was over, when everyone else had left, Maya stayed. Staring at fresh earth and a temporary marker that would be replaced with stone once she could afford it. Ethan stayed too. Silent. Present. That's when Victoria appeared. She materialized at the edge of the cemetery like a ghost in designer clothes. Black dress. Black heels. Perfectly styled hair that didn't move in the wind. She didn't approach immediately. Just waited. Patient as a predator. When Maya finally turned to leave, Victoria stepped into her path. "Maya, I'm so sorry for your loss." Her voice was honey. Her eyes were ice. "Thank you," Maya said quietly. She tried to step around her. Victoria moved with her. "I know this is a difficult time." Victoria's smile was sympathetic. "But I need to give you something." She held out an envelope. Thick. Cream-colored. Expensive. Maya took it, her hands numb. Opened it. Inside, a DNA test request. A check for $500,000. And a pre-written NDA. Maya stared at the check. More money than she'd seen in her entire life. Enough to start over. Enough to give her child everything she'd never had. Victoria's voice was soft. Gentle, even. "Take the money, Maya. Disappear. or I'll make sure everyone knows you seduced him to get pregnant. Your mother just died. Don't make this harder on yourself." Maya looked up, met Victoria's eyes, saw the calculation there, the certainty that poverty always won over pride. For a long moment, she didn't move, just held the check in trembling hands. Then slowly, deliberately, she tore it in half, then in quarters. Let the pieces fall like snow. But she kept the DNA test request, because maybe Ethan deserved the truth, even if it destroyed her. That night, Maya showed up at Ethan's office. It was late, past midnight. The building was empty except for security guards and cleaning crews. But she knew he'd be there. Men like him didn't sleep when their worlds were falling apart. She took the elevator to the top floor. Her reflection in the mirrored walls looked like a stranger, hollow-eyed, exhausted, carrying grief and life in equal measure. When she reached his office, the door was ajar, light spilling into the dark hallway. She pushed it open. Ethan was standing by the windows, hands in his pockets, staring out at a city that never slept. He didn't turn when she entered, but his shoulders tensed like he'd been waiting for this moment. Maya walked forward, put the DNA test on his desk. Her hands were shaking. "I'll take it," she said quietly. "The test. I'll take it." He turned then, looked at her, at the envelope on his desk, at the exhaustion written into every line of her body. "Maya, but I need you to answer one question first." Silence. The city hummed below them. Between them, everything hung in balance. "What?" His voice was rough. "That night. The night this all started." She met his eyes. "Were you drunk?" The question sat between them like something solid. Maya held her breath. Because everything, every moment, every choice, every fragile thing they'd built, rested on his answer. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and she saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. Then, barely above a whisper, "No." The word hit her like a physical blow. Her knees buckled. She grabbed the desk for support. Because if he wasn't drunk, if he remembered, then everything she'd believed was a lie. The shame she'd carried. The assumption that she'd been a mistake. A moment of weakness he regretted. All of it. Wrong. Then why? Her voice broke. "Why didn't you say anything?" Ethan crossed to her. Stopped just close enough that she could see the raw honesty in his face. "Because men like me don't get to keep women like you." His voice was breaking too. "Because I've spent my whole life building walls, Maya. And you were the first person who made me want to tear them down. And that terrified me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "So you let me think it was nothing." "It was everything." He reached for her hand. Held it like it was made of glass. "Every second of that night was everything. But I didn't know how to tell you that without destroying you or myself in the process." Maya stared at him. At this man who'd shown her kindness in 100 small ways, but couldn't speak the words that mattered most. "I was sober," he continued. "I was wide awake. And when you touched me, when you looked at me like I was worth something beyond my bank account, I felt human for the first time in 20 years. She was crying now. Really crying. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm done being afraid." He cupped her face, his thumb brushing away tears. "Because you deserve the truth. Because our child deserves a father who knows how to be brave." Maya opened her mouth to respond. And that's when the office door slammed open. Victoria stood there, backlit by the hallway. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, 3 board members, a lawyer, and a photographer with a camera already raised. Victoria's smile was triumphant. "Perfect timing," she said sweetly. "I believe we have a situation to discuss." The camera flashed. Maya's face. Ethan's hand still on her cheek. The DNA test on the desk behind them. Evidence. Narrative. Scandal. Everything Victoria needed to destroy them both. And as the board members filed in, as the lawyer began speaking in cold legal terms, as Victoria's eyes promised that the war was just beginning, Maya realized something. Love might not ask permission, but it demands courage. And the question wasn't whether they loved each other. The question was whether they were brave enough to fight for it. Do you think love can survive when it's built on fear and silence? When the world demands you choose between your heart and everything you've ever worked for? When staying means losing everything, except each other. The board meeting was scheduled for Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Victoria had orchestrated it perfectly. Sent the invitations herself. Framed it as a resolution meeting. A chance to clear the air, address concerns, move forward professionally. She'd even insisted Maya attend. For transparency, she'd said. So everyone can hear her side. Maya knew it was a trap. But she went anyway. Because running would only prove she had something to hide. The conference room was on the 42nd floor. All glass and polished mahogany and leather chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The kind of room where empires were built and careers were ended with equal efficiency. Maya arrived early. Wore a simple navy dress that hid her growing belly. Kept her head high even though her hands were shaking. She took a seat at the far end of the table, the side reserved for people being judged, not decision-makers. The board members filed in one by one. Expensive suits. Neutral expressions. Eyes that looked through her instead of at her. Then Victoria. Cream silk blouse. Pearls at her throat. Hair pulled back in a chignon that probably took an hour but looked effortless. She smiled at Maya. The kind of smile a cat gives a mouse before the kill. Ethan was the last to arrive. He paused when he saw Maya sitting there, alone, surrounded by people who'd already decided she was guilty. Something flickered in his eyes, anger maybe or pain, but his face remained perfectly controlled. He took his seat at the head of the table, directly across from her. Their eyes met. Held. In that moment, Maya felt less alone. Victoria cleared her throat. Thank you all for coming. I know this is uncomfortable, but it's necessary. She opened a folder in front of her. Pulled out papers. We need to address the situation involving Mr. Pierce and Ms. Carter. One of the board members leaned forward. His name was Douglas. Silver hair. Cold eyes. We've heard the rumors, Ethan. An employee. A pregnancy. Claims of paternity. This is exactly the kind of liability. She's not a liability, Ethan said quietly. She's a person. Victoria's smile tightened. Of course she is. And that's why we need to handle this carefully. She turned to Maya. Ms. Carter, would you mind telling the board how long you've worked at Pierce Industries? Maya's throat was dry. 3 years. And during that time, did you have any personal relationship with Mr. Pierce? No. No? Victoria's eyebrows lifted. But you spent the night with him after the holiday party, correct? The room went still. Eyes swiveled to Maya. Judging. Calculating. Yes, Maya said. Her voice was steady even though her hands weren't. And shortly after, you became pregnant. Yes. Victoria turned to the board, her expression one of patient concern. Ms. Carter has refused to take a paternity test. She's made it clear she expects Mr. Pierce to simply accept responsibility without proof. She's also been seen entering and leaving his residence multiple times. Late at night. She slid photos across the table. Maya leaving Ethan's building. Grainy. Taken from a distance. But unmistakable. One of the board members frowned. This looks like extortion? Victoria supplied helpfully. Or at the very least, a calculated attempt to secure financial support from a wealthy man. Maya felt the walls closing in. The air growing thin. Every face around that table had already decided who she was. A gold digger. A liar. A woman who'd seduced her boss and now expected to be rewarded for it. Victoria wasn't done. She pulled out more papers. Text messages, she said. Between Ms. Carter and several individuals, discussing Mr. Pierce's wealth, his properties, his net worth. All dated before the alleged relationship began. The messages were on the screen now. Projected for everyone to see. And they looked real. Looked like Maya had been planning this from the start. Except Maya had never sent those messages. Had never discussed Ethan's wealth with anyone. They were fake. Manipulated. But she had no way to prove it. Ms. Carter, Douglas said, his voice heavy with disappointment. Did you send these messages? No, Maya whispered. I didn't. Victoria's expression was sympathetic. I understand this is difficult. But lying will only make things worse. She turned to Ethan. For what it's worth, I believe Ms. Carter is a victim here too. Victim of her own desperation. Her mother's medical bills were astronomical. She was drowning in debt. And Mr. Pierce represented a way out. The room murmured. Agreement. Understanding. Because it made sense, didn't it? Poor girl meets rich man. Sees opportunity. Takes it. Maya felt tears building. But she wouldn't let them fall. Wouldn't give Victoria the satisfaction. That's when Ethan stood up. The room went quiet. He didn't look at Victoria. Didn't look at the board. Just reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Before we continue, he said, his voice ice cold, I think you should hear something. He pressed play. Victoria's voice filled the room. Crisp. Clear. Unmistakable. I need those records altered. The pregnancy dates. Make it look like she was involved with multiple men. I don't care what it costs. Another voice. Nervous. Male. A hospital administrator. Ms. Monroe, I could lose my license. You'll lose more than that if you don't do this. Victoria's voice was steel-wrapped in silk. Do it. And keep it quiet. The recording continued. Victoria bribing staff. Forging emails. Blackmailing witnesses who'd seen Maya and Ethan together at the hospice. Instructing them to claim Maya had been hostile, demanding, inappropriate. Evidence. Not of Maya's guilt, but of Victoria's desperation. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Victoria's face had gone white, then red. Her hands gripping the table like she might fall without it. Ethan looked at her, and the expression on his face was colder than Maya had ever seen. You wanted to destroy her to get to me, he said quietly. But the only person you've destroyed is yourself. Victoria opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Those recordings, how did you? I pay attention, Ethan said. And I protect what's mine. He turned to the board. Ms. Carter is not a liability. She's not a gold digger. She's a woman who worked 12-hour shifts to pay for her dying mother's care. A woman who never asked me for a single thing. A woman who's carried my child with more grace and dignity than anyone in this room has shown her today. Douglas cleared his throat. Ethan, we didn't know. You didn't ask. He looked around the table. You assumed. You judged. You let someone manipulate you into attacking an innocent woman because it was easier than questioning your own biases. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. What do you want us to do? Ethan's voice was final. Escort Ms. Monroe from the building. Remove her from the board. And if any of you speak about Ms. Carter or my child to anyone outside this room, I will personally ensure you never work in this industry again. 2 security guards appeared at the door. They'd been waiting. Ethan had planned this. Victoria stood slowly. Her eyes locked on Maya. And for the first time, there was no smile. No calculation. Just raw hatred. This isn't over, she said softly. Yes, Ethan replied. It is. The guards escorted her out. Her heels clicking one last time on marble floors. The sound of someone who'd gambled everything and lost. When the door closed, the room exhaled. The board members looked at each other. At Ethan. At Maya, still sitting at the far end of the table, trembling, not from fear anymore, but from relief so overwhelming it felt like drowning. The meeting adjourned. People filed out quietly. Ashamed, maybe, or just uncomfortable with having witnessed something so raw. When they were alone, Ethan crossed to Maya. Knelt beside her chair. Took her hands in his. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry I let it get that far. I'm sorry you had to sit through that. Maya looked at him through tears. You knew. You knew what she was going to do. I suspected. So I made sure I had proof. His thumb brushed her knuckles. I won't let anyone hurt you again. Not her. Not them. Not anyone. And in that moment, Maya understood something fundamental. Love wasn't just about showing up. It was about protection. About using your power not to control, but to shelter. 3 days later, the DNA test results arrived. They came in a sealed envelope. Clinical. Official. The kind of document that reduced life to percentages and probabilities. Ethan was in his office when they were delivered. Maya was there too. They'd been spending more time together since the board meeting. Learning each other. Building something neither had words for yet. He picked up the envelope. Stared at it for a long moment. Then he opened it. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. He was the father. Officially. Scientifically. Undeniably. Maya watched him read it. Saw something cross his face. Not surprise, but something deeper. Confirmation of something he'd always known but had been too afraid to believe. Then, without a word, he crumpled the paper. And threw it in the trash. Maya's breath caught. "Don't you want to keep it?" Ethan looked at her. And the expression in his eyes made her chest ache. "I didn't need a test to tell me she's mine," he said quietly. "I needed the courage to believe I deserved her." Maya felt tears building again. This pregnancy had turned her into someone who cried at everything. But these weren't sad tears. What if it had come back negative? She asked. "What would you have done?" He crossed to her. Took her face in his hands. "The same thing I'm doing now. Loving you. Loving her. Building a life with you. Because that test?" He glanced at the trash. "That was never about proof, Maya. It was about fear. And I'm done being afraid." She kissed him then. Soft. Certain. A promise that they were in this together. Because love isn't about proof. It's about faith. 6 months passed like a breath and an eternity. Maya's belly grew. Ethan went to every doctor's appointment. They painted a nursery in his penthouse, soft yellows and creams, because they decided not to find out the gender. Wanted to be surprised. They talked about names. About the future. About what kind of parents they wanted to be. Ethan stepped back from day-to-day operations at Pierce Industries. Promoted someone he trusted. Made it clear his priority was home now, not boardrooms. Maya started planning a foundation in her mother's name. For families drowning in medical debt. For daughters who needed to hear they were worth more than their bank accounts. They built a life. Slowly. Carefully. Like people who'd almost lost everything and knew how precious fragile things were. And then, on a Tuesday morning when the city was covered in spring rain, Maya went into labor. It started slow. A tightening. A pressure. She was making breakfast when the first contraction hit. Ethan was beside her immediately, phone already out, calling the hospital, grabbing the bag they'd packed weeks ago. The drive felt endless. Maya breathing through pain that came in waves. Ethan holding her hand, his knuckles white, his jaw tight with controlled panic. By the time they reached the hospital, the contractions were closer. Harder. Maya was squeezing Ethan's hand so hard she thought she might break it. The labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of pain and fear and Ethan whispering promises into her hair. "I'm here. You're doing so well. I love you. I love you. I love you." He never left. Never flinched. Just held her hand and let her break his fingers and reminded her to breathe when she forgot how. And then, just before midnight, their daughter was born. The nurse lifted her up. Tiny. Perfect. Screaming with a voice that filled the room like music. Maya was crying. Laughing. Exhausted. The nurse placed the baby on her chest and Maya's whole world rearranged itself. This was what mattered. Not money. Not power. Not anything except this small warm weight against her heart. She looked up at Ethan. He was crying too. Not the careful, controlled tears of someone trying to maintain composure. Real tears. The kind that come from somewhere so deep you didn't know they existed. "It's a girl," Maya whispered. "We have a daughter." Ethan touched the baby's tiny hand. And the infant's fingers wrapped around his. Held on. Claimed him. "What do we name her?" Maya asked. Exhausted. Glowing. Ethan looked at her. At their daughter. At the family they'd built from fear and silence and the courage to try anyway. "Hope," he said softly. "We name her Hope." Maya smiled. Because of course they did. Because that's what this child was. What they were. Hope that broken things could heal. That scared people could learn to be brave. That love didn't require perfection, just presence. The nurse took a photo. The three of them tangled together in soft hospital light. Maya exhausted but radiant. Ethan with tears still on his cheeks. Hope sleeping between them, unaware she just saved two people who thought they were beyond saving. A family born from a night that started with silence and ended with truth. 1 year later, everything was different. Ethan had officially stepped back from Pierce Industries. He still owned it, still guided major decisions, but someone else handled the daily operations. He discovered he liked being home. Liked watching his daughter discover the world. Liked the small moments more than the big deals. Maya had launched her foundation. It was small but growing. They'd helped 12 families so far. Paid off medical debt. Kept daughters in school. Given desperate people the kind of second chance her mother never got. On a Saturday afternoon in early spring, they were at the park. Hope was walking now. Well, toddling. That unsteady, joyful stumbling that babies do when they're learning gravity isn't always their friend. She'd take 3 steps, fall on her padded bottom, laugh, and try again. Maya and Ethan sat on a bench watching her. His arm around Maya's shoulders. Her hand on his knee. Comfortable. Easy. The kind of closeness that comes after surviving storms together. Do you ever regret it? Maya asked suddenly. That night? Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, every day. Maya's smile faltered. Her heart stuttered. She started to pull away. He held her closer. I regret that I waited so long to tell you the truth. That I let you think you were nothing when you were everything. That I was too much of a coward to fight for you from the beginning. He turned to look at her. But I don't regret loving you. Not for a second. I don't regret hope. I don't regret this life. I regret the time I wasted being afraid of it. Maya leaned into him. Watched their daughter chase a butterfly she'd never catch but would try for anyway. Sometimes, Ethan said softly, the mistakes we fear the most are the moments that save us. Maya nodded. Because she knew it was true. That night, the one she'd thought was a drunken mistake, a moment of weakness she tried to bury, hadn't been a mistake at all. It had been the beginning. Of honesty. Of courage. Of learning that love wasn't about control or perfection. It was about surrender. About letting someone see you completely and trusting they wouldn't run. About showing up when it's hard. About choosing each other every day, even when the world makes it easier to walk away. Hope fell again. This time, she stayed down. Looked back at her parents with huge eyes, deciding whether to cry or laugh. Ethan and Maya both stood. Walked to her together. Each took a tiny hand. And Hope stood up. Held by both of them. Steady. They walked like that. The 3 of them. Through the park. Into their future. A family that shouldn't have worked but did. Because love doesn't follow rules. It doesn't wait for perfect timing. It doesn't care about bank accounts or board meetings or what other people think. It just asks one thing. Are you brave enough? What would you have done in Maya's place? Walked away to protect your heart? Or stayed and risked everything for love? Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is love someone when you're terrified of losing them. When every logical thought says run. When fear screams that you'll get hurt. When the world tells you you're not enough. The bravest thing is to stay anyway. To say, I see you. I choose you. Even if it breaks me, I choose you. Because love isn't about control. It's about surrender. And sometimes, just sometimes, when you surrender to the scariest thing you've ever felt, you find out it's the safest place you've ever been.